Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS Show is all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. We have a couple of great guests today, but first, let's cut the BS. Ed Silverman, senior writer of Pharmalot, covers the pharmaceutical industry. He's written some great stories. One studied what types of food pharmaceutical reps bring to doctors' offices for lunch. Silverman noted that, quote, sales reps may have a long-standing reputation for dropping off pizzas in order to woo office staffs and win face time with physicians. But in reality, they're ordering more sandwiches, barbecue, and Mexican food these days, according to Easy Cater, an online site for ordering catered meals. Of more than 8,000 meals ordered through the end of October by pharma reps working for the 50 largest drug makers, 36% were for American cuisine, which generally includes burgers and sandwiches. Regardless of the cuisine, food is still our weapon of choice, said one pharma sales rep for a large drug maker who asked not to be named. This rep explained that about $17 is spent on average per person, but the type of food varies depending on local taste and demographics. Again, that's from a post by Ed Silverman, senior writer at Pharmalot. Clients, friends, and colleagues of mine know my stance on this issue. Buying someone food is not marketing. It pretty much borders on bribery. The entire marketing profession is tainted because some industries focus more on taking food to prospects than on finding out how to solve their problems or meet their needs. I realize pharmaceutical reps do more than buy food. However, the, quote, other stuff they do is not being noticed nearly as much as the food purchases. And some of the marginal pharma reps use the food delivery as too much of a crutch. The amazing thing is that it actually works. Dr. Adrian Few Berman of Georgetown University conducted a study that shows a doctor who spends just 1 minute with a sales rep typically ends up prescribing 16% more of that rep's product than before. A 4-minute encounter is likely to prompt a 52% jump in prescriptions. 4 minutes prompts a 52% jump in prescriptions. Her website will be on the show notes. It's farmedout.org, PHARMED out.org. It includes videos of current and former pharma reps talking about their, quote, marketing tactics. One comparing doling out drug samples to what your typical street dealer employs on the corner when he's selling crack. The first one's free, then you pay, then you're hooked. Programs similar to Few Berman's are rolling out at medical and nursing schools across the country, and some have even been there for a couple of years. They often provide data to doctors showing expensive drugs like those featured in direct-to-consumer ads are not any better than cheaper over-the-counter alternatives. Large health systems like UPMC here and Allegheny Health Network locally have instituted ethical guidelines with respect to, quote, marketing to physicians, imposing restrictions on consulting relationships and banning gifts from industry representatives. Let's hope healthcare marketers focus more on how to reach their target audiences with creative marketing efforts instead of debating whether to go with pizza or barbecue. The No BS Show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/nobs. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. When someone you love is hospitalized, it can be frightening for family and friends as well as for the patient. A hospital may seem like a foreign land. Sounds, smells, and the culture are unfamiliar. Even the medical terminology sounds like another language. Understanding the hospital environment and knowing how to navigate its complicated pathways can make you a strong, effective champion for your loved one. Our guest today is Bonnie Friedman, author of Hospital Warrior, How to Get the Best Care for Your Loved One, which demystifies the process and provides the tools, understanding, and insight you need to get the best care for your loved one. Based on Bonnie's own experiences fighting her husband Bob's healthcare needs for more than 24 years and through 14 separate hospitalizations, Her book, Hospital Warrior, lays out in direct, simple terms hard-learned and time-tested tactics to help ensure a loved one's medical needs are met. We have Bob and Bonnie here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Thank you.
Let's start by having you, Bonnie, walk us through your educational background and your career journey.
Well, I left Pittsburgh when I graduated high school to go to Washington, D.C., and I went to college at American University. While I was still in school, I got an internship working in communications at the National Institutes of Health. Little did I know that starting at NIH would bring me round full circle, and I'd end up back in healthcare communications so many years later. When I graduated from college, I worked at NIH for a number of years and then went to the Department of Labor. And I stayed at Labor for a long time, ending my career there with a long stretch as the communications director of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. After OSHA, I went to work for the Small Business Administration, where I was the marketing director for a few years. And then I left the federal government and I started my own communications and marketing consultancy, which I ran as a sole proprietor, Bonnie Friedman Strategic Communications, and I did that for a number of years. During all of this time, Bob had a range of health issues and needs and a number of hospitalizations. Not knowing when he might be sick or how severe it might be was the normal for our family, and it was the only normal we knew. There were times when his health was very seriously challenged and we didn't know if he'd survive. And there were times when I was required to be away from work much more than I would have liked or would have wanted in view of his health. I was lucky to be working for the federal government during those years because I was able to take the time I needed to care for him and care for the family. When I started my own business, I was able to make my own schedule. I could be very flexible. And when his health needs intervened, I was able to accommodate as I needed to do so. But his last illness was a stretch of events, and it came at a time when we were also planning our daughter's wedding. So there were a number of interrupting factors. And by the time it was all said and done, our daughter was happily married, Bob was fully recovered. The business had more or less flatlined. I had not paid attention to it for a couple of years. And I faced the question, did I want to restart the business? But by that time, I had a burning passion to do something with all of the knowledge that I had learned over 24 and going on that 25 years of experience. And so I decided then that my passion was really going to drive the next step. The business was not officially closed, it was just sidelined. And I started to put all of my energy and attention and resource into the writing of this book, Hospital Warrior.
The No BS Marketing Podcast with Dave Mastovich is brought to you by Mass Solutions. Put our 3-step No BS process to work for you. Visit masssolutions.biz today to take your marketing to another level. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.
I'm excited to talk about the book, but I have to go back because this is a great career path that can help our listeners. You've been a communicator your entire life, and this show's about leadership and communication. Talk about the OSHA experience. What stories did you tell? What managing of communications happened with OSHA?
One of the most dramatic stories that I can tell to come out of OSHA was beginning September 12th, 2001, the day after 9/11. On 9/11, we in the Department of Labor were evacuated very early from the building. As you in Pittsburgh will all remember, there was a plane out there and no one knew where it was headed, but the expectation was it was coming for the Capitol. The Labor Department sits right at the foot of the Capitol. So we were evacuated very early that morning and sent home. The government was closed on September 12th, although I was in contact with my bosses and knew to be at the ready bright and early September 13th. So I was preparing the day before. When I got to work that morning of September 13th, my boss, who was the head of OSHA and the Assistant Secretary of Labor, called to say, "The White House wants me in New York this afternoon. We need to start overseeing the protection of workers at the 9/11 site at Ground Zero. And because of the public attention and the media attention, I need to bring my top communicator with me. Can you leave for New York this afternoon?" Neither of us had a bag. Neither of us had a toothbrush. There were no planes flying. We got on a train and were in New York late that afternoon. And for the next couple of days, we worked out of the OSHA office in New York at Ground Zero, organizing communication around the protection of workers. But we also were there really among the first wave of government officials outside of the first responders themselves. And so part of what we did was walk Ground Zero handing respirators out to workers, saying, "Please wear these. The air is unknown and unstable." And we talked to everyone we could about protections they needed to take care of themselves if they were going to be at the site. That was a dramatic start to what was a year or more of managing the communications out of New York and around the protection of workers. OSHA worked very hard to provide as much protection as they could, and other federal agencies, of course, were involved too. I came back to Washington and went back and forth for over a year to do the best we could to provide as much information and communication as we could. I'll never forget being at Ground Zero in those very early days. It changed something deep inside me, and the idea of being so close to such evil and such death is an experience that, when you have it, is very deeply felt and one you'll never forget.
That's Bonnie Friedman. It's the No BS Marketing Show. This show is about leadership and communication, and your story about when you worked for OSHA and your boss being a leader and realizing the importance of communication and taking its top communications person to Ground Zero tells you how significant both leadership and communication are. That's a great anecdote for our audience. You leave OSHA and you go to the SBA. I don't think you can match that story, but give us one.
Well, I left OSHA after 7 years, and as you might imagine, working in that intense an environment, not every day was as intense as September 13th, but it is an intense environment, and there's always something very dramatic going on when it comes to OSHA, whether it's a rescue of a worker halfway across the country or a firefight on Capitol Hill over regulations and the implications of them. It's a very intense place to work. I was overseeing all of the communication of the agency, and it required me to focus heavily on media, heavily on political implications of what was going on, and building out what I hoped would become a much stronger marketing program. And all of that was going on simultaneously. While I was at OSHA, we also rebranded the agency. I became really interested in pursuing the marketing angle. And I couldn't do that as heavily as I wanted and still oversee everything else that was going on. And so an opportunity came up to go to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and concentrate only on marketing. It was a luxury I had never had in my career, and it was one I really wanted to pursue. It was also interesting to come at federal communication from a very different angle. SBA is obviously a very strong proponent of small business, and it's a business perspective that you bring to all of the marketing for the agency. Coming from the Department of Labor, there's much more of a worker perspective. And so I felt very fortunate to be able to get both of those in my career. I think most people don't have that opportunity, and it gave me a point of view and a broader understanding. And I think it helped a lot when I went into business for myself then, because as a business person, I had much better grounding in business, having worked at the SBA. And I was much better able to understand the needs of other business people, having come from the SBA. I think if I had only worked at labor and then gone into business, I wouldn't have had that breadth of experience and perspective. So I think having both was really, really helpful.
I do too. Coming into the show and during the prep, I was thinking about this, what you just described, and was going to ask you about it. So you've covered that. It gives you the perspective from three different ways. You had two government-related agencies that were very different, and then, of course, your own business. So you've seen the whole spectrum. So when you hear the rhetoric on either side, you can kind of say, well, that's true, but that isn't. That's true, but that isn't, because there is so much rhetoric on it. So when you look at the SBA and OSHA, what we tend to do, as pretty much all of us as humans, is we have our own stuff going on, and we either don't know about something or we have a misperception. So explain to people how and why a governmental agency has communications and has marketing.
Well, first of all, a government agency, as I'm sure everyone recognizes, is a public entity, and it's funded with public dollars. So I would say, first and foremost, the public has a right to know. You, as a taxpayer, are entitled to easily accessible information from your government, whether it's federal, state, or local. That's your right. You're paying for it. And I think that government agencies over the years have come to recognize that more and more. There's more emphasis on the needs of customers and understanding of stakeholders, and the need to provide information, not just in a general way, but information that's targeted. What you as a small business person need from the SBA may be quite different than what a trade association needs from the SBA or what a member of Congress wants from the SBA. The same is true of an agency in the Department of Labor. You have many constituencies. It could be workers, it could be labor unions, it could be other businesses that have a vested interest in requirements and regulations. It could be any number of groups, and all of them need information. It's not just a want of information. They need it, and the government has an obligation to provide it. Now, over the years, as our tools and outlets have multiplied many times over, I see how the government continues to grow and try to fill the needs in many different ways. So, of course, now we have many social media outlets. 10 years ago, I don't think we saw so many government agencies with Facebook pages. Now it would be surprising to find one that didn't.
Yes.
So I think people have a right to know, they have a need to know, and government has an obligation to provide it.
You've had the chance to work with and for a diverse group of talented people. Who were your mentors?
One of my early mentors was a boss of mine. He was the Assistant Secretary of Labor at the time, and I was quite young. He came in, took me under his wing, and demanded a lot of me and taught me a lot as well. And I'll give a shout out to him by name. His name's Don Ellisberg, and he now lives in Florida. But Don stretched me in ways. He was a lawyer, still is a lawyer, with a lot of background in a variety of fields. And as the assistant secretary, he first assigned me speeches to write. And some of them were legal lectures to be given to lawyer groups like the ABA. I didn't know anything about the law, or very little. And his attitude was, you can do this. And he would give me some general direction and give me some idea of where he wanted to go and let me loose. And by just gently guiding me and tweaking things a little here and a little there, he taught me so much and shaped my career. We went in different directions after that. I got a new job. He was a political appointee. The administration changed. Things went in their own course. And then many years later, when I came to the position of the communications director of OSHA, Dawn had a direct professional role in some of the work of the agency. And so we were back together again and forged an even stronger relationship. So he started out as a supervisor, became a great mentor, and now is a good friend. So that's one example. I had some other teachers along the way, and I'll mention one as a fast forward when we talk about the book. One of Bob's doctors very early on, his surgeon named Gary Rubin, taught me from a very early stage some of the basic tools I needed to become an advocate for Bob. He taught me how to read the lab results that came in on a daily basis and to understand the trends and know what they meant. And this was long before the days of electronic health records and before there was general acceptance of the fact that patients and families had a right to see the records and the results. And Dr. Rubin told all of the nurses and doctors on the floor that I was to be given access to Bob's medical records and lab reports anytime I wanted them. So I really had a big, wide door open for me, and with his guidance, the basic tools I needed to understand. And I think that is very much a part of the foundation of the advocacy work I built. One was an expectation that I could look at records. Now we take that more for granted, but we didn't in the beginning. And second, some tools and knowledge to understand what that meant and why it was important. And three, the beginning of a dawn of awareness that I had a voice in all of this.
That's Bonnie Friedman. It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. Bonnie, talk about a learning experience when maybe you were a BS employee, a tough boss, or maybe your communication wasn't what it needed to be. Looking back, when do you think you might have been guilty of some BS?
I started my career in government right out of college. And when I got to the Department of Labor and started to work my way up the career ladder into positions where I was supervisory, where I was in charge of a particular area of communication, more and more I would be in a position where I'd be interacting with very high-level political appointees of the department, often at the assistant secretary level, but sometimes even at the secretary of labor level as well. And when I was younger and a little less confident, I was a little intimidated by these high-level appointees with very big, impressive titles. And so I would be hesitant about giving advice. And even when I saw something that I thought needed to be pointed out, perhaps you could say this differently, maybe there's a different approach for getting that kind of message across, or don't blink so much in front of the camera. I was a little nervous about speaking up. Over the years, I started to develop more and more confidence in my ability to give good advice and my confidence in knowing I was right about what I was saying. And I started to learn that if good advice is given respectfully and diplomatically, but clearly, respect is given in return. And by the time I was at the peak of that career, I would often take aside a high-level official and say privately, inside the confines of your office, I will be a tough critic. I will give you the advice I think you need to hear from someone on a very personal level. But outside this office, I will be your biggest fan. I will never criticize you in front of the public or other staff. I will never put you in an uncomfortable or awkward position publicly. But privately, I will always tell you what I think you need to hear.
Great advice and true leadership and personal growth to talk about that and have developed that. Bob, I want to bring you in. The Bob and Bonnie story is an inspirational one. So I wanted to start off with Pittsburgh girl. Where'd you meet her, and walk me through that?
Well, Bonnie and I met at a dance in Silver Spring, Maryland. That's how it started.
And see what happens when Pittsburgh people get involved. See what happens, Bob?
Yes, of course.
So who was the better dancer?
I was.
She's nodding, giving him approval to say that. Bob, talk about, we're going to talk about the book in a little bit, but I wanted to pull you in to get your perspective. What was the perspective like for you when she was at ground zero? That story is such a compelling one.
You know, I was thinking about that while she was describing it, and very honestly, I can't recall how I felt. It was sort of an outer world sense, but I just can't clearly recall. The only thing I can remember is picking Bonnie and her boss up at the train station when they came back. That's really the only thing I remember.
So she's had this really interesting career, and I know with Darlene, my wife, I talk a lot about how when I started Mass Solutions, it was almost it just was a complete culture shock because I had gone from working in senior management positions at very large companies, and then I went to my own small company. Talk about how that transition impacted you.
I'm sorry.
When she went from having the corporate jobs at OSHA and the SBA and then started her own consultancy?
I was home a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, as I recall, I had retired first. Bonnie continued to work. And then a couple of years after I retired, Bonnie did and got involved with this business. And again, I don't have any clear recollections of that time.
Bob, what was your career?
I was a teacher. I taught math in high school in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do in part 2 of the No BS show is we're going to focus on the book and talk about your inspirational story and how it can help our listeners. So hear more of my interview with Bob and Bonnie Friedman on part 2